Howdy ho, everyone, and welcome aboard. Am I a little bit early? Maybe just a tad. In the meantime, I'll welcome those who are here. It's nice to have you on board for another weekly Sunday market update. And my name is Jeff Pine. I'm a senior trader with Actions to Wealth who bring you this session each and every Sunday. Thanks for joining us once again. My aim in this session is well, to give you ideas or to share with you my ideas for the week ahead and how I go about formulating those. Before I do, I'm actually going to reverse engineer that and tell you exactly what I'm looking to trade this week. Whether they set up or not is an entirely different story, but I'm going to reveal right now that I'm after two currency pairs, very, very similar in nature, but there is a little nuance, of course, between them. We're going to look to trade pound versus the Swiss long, and I'm going to look to trade Australian dollar versus the Swiss long. Now, you will probably note when you look at your charts that both of those pairs had a very good week last week to the upside. And I was about to say very confident, but that's not a thing that I should be saying. I'm on board both of those pairs to continue those strong performances of last week, and I'm going to go about telling you why that might be the case. So let's get into it and start with where I really should start most weeks, and quite often I don't. I leave this to last. But because I'm a technical trader, I don't tend to be looking at fundamentals in really close detail. I've got some friends who do that for me, and they share those insights with me, and that makes my life a whole lot easier, I've got to say. If you are of a similar ilk, a technical trader, but would like to know what's going on in the outside world and what may influence your trades, then I would suggest that you grab hold of one of those people who do all that work. I'm going to give you a plug here right now for my good mate Ash, who is my trading buddy, who does a wonderful newsletter each and every day of the week. And I would highly recommend that to you. And you can find out how to join that by contacting Actions to Wealth, of course. So I'm actually looking back before I look forward, just to refresh my memory as to what took place last week as far as the currency pairs were concerned and data releases. The data releases, of course, were centered around the Canadian dollar. I'm not going to give you commentary on this because I'm not a fundamental person, but here's what I take note of and come to my own conclusions as to what that currency might do for the upcoming week. You had, of course, lots of stuff coming out from the US, including retail sales figures, but of course, the big one was the Federal Open Market Committee, who slashed their rates by 50 basis points. Again, I'll let you decide how you're going to deal with that as far as the strength of the US dollar is concerned, but I know what I think, and I would certainly take that on board. Aussie dollar had unemployment figures come out, and the more green you see, of course, the better it would appear that the currency is going to perform. Again, I'm not going to enter into that. And you also had the Bank of England giving their finance rate, and they held firm at 5%. Again, you can read what you want into that, but I suggest you take note of it. And of course, you had the good old BOJ, the Bank of Japan, also holding steady on the interest rates. And you might want to have a look at what was said around all those particular statements. Retail sales figures out of Canada tended to, I suppose, wipe out what was negative in the week for the CAD, with some nice positive figures there on retail sales. So that's what you need to be taking. That was what I'm certainly taking notice of from the past week. Current week, or the week ahead, if you like, the Euro figures early in the week with manufacturing and services PMIs. It seems to be an early trend this week for PMI figures coming out. and certainly from that sector, and of course in the US as well. Might be a good idea that they're happening on Monday, because that will tend to shape how I will look at the market for the coming week. Big one for us here in Australia is, of course, the RBA rate statement, and RBA holding firm on their belief that the inflation is still going to hold in Australia, and very, very unlikely to do anything with that interest rate. Again, there are a couple more things going on. CPI figures also coming out in Australia. Interestingly, after the after the RBA make their statement. Had that been before, the statement may have been a far more interesting week for the Aussie. We will see how that all pans out. Swissy have their monetary policy statement as well, and we've got economic data coming out from the States late in the week. And of course, Powell will speak on Thursday. Not sure what he can say more than what was said last week, but there you go, could turn the market. And we've got economic data, or the economic situation coming out in Canada as well. So looking at those things and combining them with last week could be an interesting exercise for you. It certainly is for me, as I try and scramble my brain or unscramble my brain as to what that all means. And again, as I say, there's professionals that do that for me as well, and I can look to them to point me in the right direction from a fundamental perspective. Let's go to the charts, and the first thing I'm going to look at this week is the currency indexes. The currency indexes, of course, are primarily weighted against the US dollar. I know this is the US dollar versus itself, but it is it's a good indicator of relative strength of a currency, and it is supposed to be about that currency that is highlighted here as a comparative against, or relative, if you like, strength against the other major currencies, but primarily weighted against the US dollar. Speaking of which, the US dollar index on the weekly chart, these are all weekly charts that I'll be looking at, because what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to give myself a bias going into the week. Not really looking for anything more than that. It's just to give me a little bias going into the coming week, saying, okay, well, the US dollar, is it going to be weak or strong? That's pretty much it. And the chart here, from a technical point of view, because I'm a technical trader, I'm looking at the chart, and the chart's going to tell me what I need to know, hopefully. What I see here is a bit of a mixed bag, but primarily I'm looking at a break of the support level on the dollar index and a retest of that level which failed, or an attempt to go back above that level which failed. It hasn't failed strongly, however, because you can see that the 3 weeks since that that rally back above that level, which is what, 101, 12 or something like that, 101.20, as I've got it. I think that's round about the level. It's a bit of a cloud of price. But the 3 weeks since that happened haven't really been conclusive, in my humble opinion. Tried to break down, but failed. Tried to go higher, but failed, and tried to do both, and failed both times. So the only thing I can conclude from this chart is that we're probably going to see a little bit more consolidation on the dollar until it breaks either low or high. If that's going to be this week, happy days. I would suggest that the dollar news this week is far less important than it was last week, and for that reason, I don't see this moving too much. If it was going to move, surely that would have happened last week, in my humble opinion. So I don't think the dollar is going to move too far, but that gives me something to think about. Aussie dollar. Aussie dollar, as I said, interest rates announcement on Tuesday this week. Has the Aussie got through this resistance level, or hasn't it, is the question. The horizontal level would suggest that we're bang on that level. So we're at a resistance level on the Aussie. The trend line, however, depending on which trend line you choose, and you could choose another one that agrees with the horizontal level. I could certainly do that, and it's probably the one to take notice of. This will be, or or the fate, if you like, of the Aussie dollar for this week will be determined, in my humble opinion, by what the RBA says. And if they continue their stance, which is stubborn, refusing to reduce interest rates at the moment, then I see the Aussie continuing its run. And for that reason, I don't see this run of the Aussie changing. We've been flagging this for weeks and weeks and weeks, if not months, where this big tweezer bottom at the support level was going to dictate terms for some time, and it has done that. And all of these rejections, see all of these long, low test bars here, suggested to me that this was destined for higher. And this week, and the RBA will probably give us a result on that. So I'm tipping that the Aussie will continue its rally, but it is at resistance. Canadian dollar, not dissimilar to the Aussie, of course, in many ways, because it's a risk-on currency and it's also a commodity-driven currency. I suspect the oil price, which has rallied, I know, in the last little bit, but has also been off, coincides to a degree with the Canadian dollar, and the Canadian dollar looks to be under pressure to me. So I think it's in the weak basket. The Canadian dollar won't be looking to buy that in any way, shape, or form. I can't say that about the pound, however, and I think this looks to be the strongest of a technical currency that I can find on the charts at the moment. Reason for that, yes, it closed on its high and had a good week last week, coming off a very, very nice retest and rejection, if you like, of that previous horizontal level, and looks to me to be on a tear towards 137, 136.80 as I've got it. So I think the British pound is one that you can follow, or one that I'll certainly be looking to follow this week. Swissy, on the other hand, although I have been following this right up the chart here, filling up my ascending channel, and I do believe it will ultimately get to this point. You can see this resistance level that was rejected, where? Christmas time, pretty much Christmas time, Boxing Day. That was rejected and drove price down to Billio. Same level has been rejected once, twice, 3 times, 4 times here in the last month or so. Last week, big game changer bar to the downside, combined with 2 weeks ago, that's giving me a tweezer top that is at a very, very strong resistance level. So I've got to be bearish the Swissy at the moment, but only to here. I think it's still got upside to it. So I wouldn't like to be chasing this a long, long way, but I think this week the Swissy is under pressure. Kiwi, similar to the Aussie in many, many ways, of course. They're kind of kissing cousins. Not convincing that it's gone through this resistance level. Similar to the Aussie, we're not convinced that it's through this level. It may track the Aussie if the RBA says go or no go on reducing interest rates. This may well benefit from that, but far more riskier, in my opinion, than would the Aussie be if the RBA says no to reducing interest rates, which I suspect they will. This is the most interesting currency, in my humble opinion, the yen. My goodness gracious. Do we now believe that the rally that the yen has experienced for the last, 2 months, a bit more, July, August, halfway through September, do we believe that that's going to continue, or is last week the harbinger of doom for the yen? Great question. Don't know. Fundamentals will drive this one, and technically what I see here is a big reversal bar, no question there, but I also see that if this level is to be believed as the resistance level, and it is horizontally very, very similar, it's now been broken or equaled. The gap up suggests that there were buyers about until probably a news event forced this down, and I can't remember. The Fed, maybe, I don't know. Again, I'm not a fundamentalist, but to my mind, this could very well be one of these things. So a false sense of security for anything against the yen may have been heralded here. I would suspect that if price came back above this line, then we're going to see more upside for the yen. And I think I might be on board with that if I got proof of it, but I haven't got any proof of it. And for that reason, I think I'll stay well away from it. Euro at resistance, not dissimilar to what we've seen on a few currency pairs, but you've got to say, or I've got to say, that this is at the resistance level. The pound is through the resistance level. So euro versus the pound, I'm on board with the pound over the euro. And that little sector of the world, I think, could be fruitful, continue ongoing for the next little bit. So there you go. Out of all of that, neutral the dollar, bullish the Aussie, but the RBA has to stand firm and say no to an interest rate cut, which they're predicted to do. Canadian dollar, I'm a little bit weak on that. Short term, pound on bullish. Swissy, yeah, bearish Swissy, but only short term. I think this week will be a tester for the Swissy, but I wouldn't want to go beyond that. Kiwi at resistance. Aussie's a far better one than the Kiwi. And of the condols or commodity currencies, I think the Aussie far outstrips the Canadian dollar and the Kiwi at the moment. Yen, anybody's guess, and the euro maybe a little bit weak at that resistance level. So how does that now pan out as far as my charts are concerned, and exactly how am I going to play this? How did I come to pound Swissy long, and how did I come to Aussie Swissy long? Well, I've got a thing called game changers, which you may or may not have heard me speak of before, if you've ever heard me speak before. They are the technical levels or the technical indicators that I use to give me a bias for the week. You've already seen, like, I've used the news a little bit, or the data from last week, upcoming this week. I've used the relative strength on the currency pairs, or the currencies per se, and now I'm going to bring all of that round to the charts and say, well, what do I see? What's the chart telling me? That all of those indicators may help me decide what I'm going to trade. So I've got, about 6 or 7 of those, and I've highlighted them here on my scanner, well, not my scanner, but the one I use, which of course is ATW equipment. And it's going to tell me what happened last week at the end of the day, or at the end of the week per se. CAD versus the Swissy is suggesting, because of this bar, whose low was lower than the previous week, but closed on or near its high. And that's my criteria for selecting what I call a game changer bar. If you want to look up what a game changer bar is, you won't find it. But what you will find on a technical chart, or anybody who deals with candle patterns, is a thing called a key reversal. That's what I use as a game changer, or that almost same description. To me, if it's closed below the if it's low is below the previous week's low, and it closed on or near its high, it suggests that price will continue to go in the same direction as that bar or candle, if you like. I just can't trade that per se without giving it some sort of context, and the context needs to be well, twofold really. It needs to agree with what is actually going on in what I call the big picture. The big picture here on the weekly chart couldn't be any clearer, in my humble opinion. It's saying that the dominant feature of this chart is a downtrend. If I go to the monthly chart, that will agree with that in spades. What I need to see before I could trade this currency long, or this currency pair long, would not be a one candle reversal like this is. I mean, this is a very, very strong reversal bar without question. But look where it is. It's a new low, 100% agree, but it's in an incredibly strong downtrend and has been for the longest time. So what I would need to see to trade that would be a confirmation. Now, here's the same one bar reversal or one candle reversal. This may or may not be a higher low based on that reversal. If it is, then happy days. It's not in my trading kit or toolkit, if you like, to trade that as a potential one higher low. Second higher low, no problem at all. But the first higher low is just a little bit too tricky for me. I could go down to the daily chart, and that's exactly what I will do to see if I can find a reason why this is now ready to go long. At the moment, what I see is this channel here, and we're at a resistance level, form a support, reject, 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 reject. I can't enter here. It doesn't make sense to me. So happy to say I'm aware that CAD Swiss has got a big reversal bar. And if I saw on a daily chart a reason to go long, that would come as maybe a break and retest of this level, which would then, of course, give me the lower high in here and maybe even higher low, and maybe even a second higher low. Then I could trade it. But at the moment, the answer is no. So the same thing is going to apply all the way through here. The yen pairs, as I said, do we now say that reaction last week from anything against the yen, which of course was weak yen, strong anything else against the yen, is that going to continue, or is this a short covering rally? Who knows at this point? So the criteria that I use to answer that question is, again, the second higher low out, not the first. So if I saw that on this daily chart, price come back here, I'd be more than willing to trade it if it produced that higher low. At this juncture, and I'll probably come back to this chart, it's telling me that we've had a very, very strong reversal of the longest term trend, followed by a failed rally, then another what I call game changer bar or key reversal bar. This is the weekly chart I'm looking at. And now I've got one in the opposite direction. I can't trust that. I really can't trust that at this point. And I'd much rather go with this one. So I've got a candle pattern that I use to trade. And this is one of them. And it's not telling me to go long. It's telling me to go short underneath that bar. We might come back to that, and I'll explain that a little bit further. Swissy versus the yen, also giving me exactly the same scenario. So how can I trade that long? In my world, I can't. I have to wait until that's confirmed as a reversal. Looks good, absolutely looks good, and people will trade it, and they probably win on it if it goes long, and it could very well do that. But I need to have a little bit more evidence that is the case before I do so. So it's going to be exactly the same with euro yen. No need to comment any further than I already have. Pound versus the Aussie is really interesting because we came up with a strong pound. We came up with an Aussie that's potentially strong based on what the RBA says. And we've got this massive double top sitting here. And is this the first lower high out? Maybe. I don't know. Last week ended far less impressive for the Aussie versus the pound than it started. If I go back to the daily chart, you'll see evidence of that, where Aussie was beating the pound quite substantially. It looked as though this was going to go on with the job. Interestingly, on Wednesday and Friday, we saw well, you could probably say throw Thursday into that as well, because it is a big reversal bar. Only took it back to the monthly pivot, however, and this now becomes very interesting for me as to what direction this will take. I hesitate to even speculate on that before the RBA does have their meeting on Tuesday, but I'm kind of in the camp of don't want to trade this at all, because I've got a pound that's strong, I've got an Aussie that's potentially strong, but RBA dependent. If the RBA were to cut interest rates, then this one goes up that way, big time. So you might want to watch that RBA statement. If it does, or if the RBA are dovish even, then I think pound Aussie benefits from that. That would be, of course, in line and in concert with that game changer bar, which of course is telling us to buy here. Hesitant to do that, as I said, because of that big double top potential for that to be a lower high, but the RBA statement will tell all. Does it agree with the big picture, of course, is my other query around that. And ooh, what do you reckon? Is this bearish? Is it bullish? Is it sideways? I think it's more sideways than it is anything else. You could throw a few trend lines on here, which would suggest that perhaps we're through that resistance area. Maybe there is a buy to be had there, but I'd wait for the RBA statement. That's the monthly chart I'm looking at, by the way. But it does look to be a little bit each way here. That's pound Aussie. Is it the last one? No, there's a couple more to go. Pound versus the Kiwi. Now, pound versus the Kiwi is again a game changer bar here, and in its own right, the Kiwi's had a reasonable couple of weeks, and the pound looks to be outpacing it. Interestingly, this big rally, pound versus the Kiwi, hasn't really been obliterated, but it has got Kiwi's got a fair way into that. I'm unsure here, but as a slingshot candle pattern, and I haven't shared those with you. There's a couple of those that I want to look at. This is one of them. Pound versus the Kiwi is telling me that this is a potential false break of not only that trade line or trend line, but also this horizontal level and this strong resistance. So not convinced here that this is as it appears to be, which is strong. Big picture, as I said, that's the one we need to look at. And the big picture is really, I suppose, coming off this base, but it is at resistance, too tough. I think it can go either way. So I don't have conclusive evidence that I can actually trade that. Kiwi versus the yen. We're looking at the monthly there, and I don't need to tell you anything versus the yen has been extremely bullish for the longest time. And here we have exactly the same scenario as we looked at before. I can't trust that, really can't, because it's just not in agreement with the big picture. Dollar versus CAD, really interesting, and I'm on board with this one. This one is a game changer bar to the downside. Now, the other criteria that I use is what I term market structure. And market structure for me right here is this rectangle that we're facing or that we're dealing with. And we've last come off the top of that with a massive reversal bar. We've now come back. This is the potential lower high. I do agree with this one. Big picture's telling me that we have that big double top sitting there. We've now retested this level 3 or 4 times. It's failed 3 or 4 times. I would suspect we're going back down to the bottom of this range. And for that reason, the weekly game changer bar on dollar versus the CAD makes perfect sense to me. I think I'm going to put an entry under here, put my stop loss well above the bar, and look for downside here on dollar versus the CAD. Dollar versus the Swissy, at support, no question. There is a range in here on the smaller time frame. I think I'd be rather trading the range. As I said, dollar is likely to range. I would rather be trading that as a range than I would be as a reversal. Dollar versus the Swissy, that is, dollar versus the yen, the last one of them. Again, the yen pairs can't trade them at the moment because the only way I see this being a buying opportunity is with a confirmation. So it's got to take out probably this level and then give me a higher low before I could trade it. So how did I come to pound versus the Swissy and Aussie versus the Swissy? Well, the charts aren't really conclusive about the Aussie until the RBA. Well, they are before the RBA, they're strong, but until the RBA, it's hard to trade. So the pound versus the Swissy took off a fortnight ago and has now this strong level here, this strong horizontal level has broken through that. And I'd need to see a pullback before I traded it. That's the weekly chart, don't forget. If I got a nice little dip here. I think this is one to follow. So buy the dips on pound versus the Swissy. Aussie versus the Swissy. As I said, it's going to be dependent on the RBA. But if you want to get into it early and get ahead of the RBA, then I think that's entirely possible as well. However, you are at a resistance level. Love to see a pullback off here. In fact, I'd love to see a break and retest before the RBA. I don't think that's going to happen. But a pullback here, giving me a higher low. I think Aussie Swissy is one that I want to follow. So, dollar CAD, Aussie Swissy, pound Swissy. But remember, the Aussie is going to be dependent on the RBA. I think they're three to follow. In terms of range, I mentioned before that I like to trade ranges. I've got the Aussie versus the CAD up here at a strong resistance level. You can see that there's a bit of a box in here as well. I'm favouring downside on this, but not if the RBA holds firm. I think this will go long. But if they were to say, okay, we're going to cut interest rates next month, or 6 weeks away now, then this will probably fill that range. So dependent entirely on the RBA. I want to leave you with two more that are possibles for me this week. CAD versus the Swissy I've already mentioned, and I think that could come off the top here. If it does give you a lower high in here on the daily chart, I think that's beautiful trade down to the bottom of that channel. And I already mentioned CAD yen. I want to come back to it because it has given us the first higher low out. If I got a second, then I think CAD yen is probably a buy. I would favour Aussie yen in all of that, but I've already given you the Aussie story. We've already had the first higher low out here. The Aussie story is dependent on the RBA, but either of those with a higher low in here makes perfect sense for me to trade because it's the second higher low out, and they're the ones I want to capture. Guys, that's kind of where my brain's at this week and where I'll be looking to find trades. I'm hopeful that there'll be something on offer for us a little bit later. Maybe not tomorrow, but the dollar CAD, I think, is eminently tradable. If I'll just go back to that, if there's no big gap in the market tomorrow. So I think, although the CAD's under pressure, and I get that, I think dollar CAD is a possible trade for me tomorrow, trading that bar on the weekly. We'll see how we go. All right, so that's it for the week. I think you've got Annis next week. That should be fun with her. But thanks for being with us for another